Several state and city officials across the nation have responded to President Trump's announcement that the United States will be pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Mayor Michael Hancock said that the city of Denver will do what it can to live up to the Paris Agreement, and Governor John Hickenlooper called Trump's decision a serious mistake. Natasha, what did you make of the local reaction to a very big international story?
Well, I think I was first and foremost surprised by how quickly it came. Usually politicians take a moment to see what the temperament is, how people are going to feel about this. But these were very quick responses, which I think says a lot about how much support the state and its officials are going to give this issue. That regardless of what happens with pulling out of this agreement, the state of Colorado is going to continue forward with what it's doing. What I find interesting, too, is that it didn't take very long for people to figure out that they could both support Trump's departure and then also not really say whether they agreed with climate change or not. And when you came down to it, that's kind of what Kaufman did in his response, which was supporting the withdrawal but saying that we would continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So how that plays out in the next couple of weeks as reporters really dig into, like, okay, but if you feel that way, then why would you support this, is going to be interesting for us. I think the overall message for me that has had the most impact is the French president's statement of "Make the planet great again." I think that that has been just so crazy over social media today, and I think we're just going to see more of it. That question of where does America fit in the global picture? What can we do to be a part of making this planet great again?
David, are you confident that critics or supporters of the Paris Climate Agreement know much about it?
Of course not. 99% of people don't have any clue about it, about the agreement at all. They just have a tribal thing one way or the other, as is true on many issues. But we did have an election in this country where this was an issue. The guy who won the election promised to withdraw from the agreement, and he kept his campaign promise. I think the sensible people on the issue will follow the folks like at the Cato Institute, which I'm affiliated with, are climate experts like Michael Tanner, Bjorn Lomborg and others, who say certainly there's strong evidence that over the last, say, 150 years, there's been, not only has the temperature globally increased, but at least some of that increase is due to man-made activity. The question is then, what are you going to do about that? If President Obama had been acting in a constitutional manner, when he signed a treaty with 197 other countries, the appropriate thing is you bring it back to the United States and put it before the United States Senate for ratification. He deliberately, and then you make the case to the American people about why this is so important and why it's the best solution and the best way to address things instead of the alternatives. And if you convince the American people, then you have a ratified treaty, which is binding law, which one president can't do away with. But instead, Obama evaded the Constitution and created what was in effect a treaty illegally. So, as a matter of constitutional law and in the rule of law in general, it was absolutely right to get out of this thing because it sets a terrible precedent of presidential unilateralism, contrary to our constitutional system. The other countries, France, Italy, United Kingdom, that are still enthusiastic about it, went through their own legal, proper processes of having the treaty be ratified by Parliament. So that this is a big win for the rule of law.
Eric, does this become a pretty significant campaign weapon for folks? Because I honestly don't think, I don't want to besmirch the American public, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of people who go in, dig into the details of the Paris Climate Agreement. They're going to say, if I'm pro something like this, then it was a terrible thing we got out of it, or if I'm against being told what to do by an international agreement, then I'm against, one way or the other. But does it become a campaign weapon for folks running in really just a few months for Congress?
Oh, of course it's a campaign weapon, but there's so many campaign weapons, and they're developing on a daily or much less at most weekly basis, that they're just one of many campaign weapons. And this is an issue where, in real time yesterday with the announcement, you could watch everyone running to their predictable corners. And there's just no nuance to this issue at all. If you have any skepticism about the Paris Accords, not about climate change, but about the Paris Accords as a workable document, then you're somehow branded a denier. If conversely you think that yes, we do need to do something as a planet or as a country about greenhouse gas emissions, then you're branded as someone who doesn't care about the economy and jobs and is somewhere up there in the clouds, in the green clouds. What's completely lacking here is any sense of nuance. The argument that was used by a lot of people in the White House, starting with Ivanka Trump, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, and others who were trying to persuade Trump to stay in the agreement, not to withdraw, almost is testimony to the weakness of the Paris Agreement. The argument was, well, there's really no teeth to it. Why get out of it? There's no teeth to it. Just change the targets for the U.S., whatever. So even the argument for staying, to me, was testimony to the weakness of the agreement. David is absolutely right from a constitutional law perspective of how Obama should have treated this. Obviously, the votes were never going to be there in the United States Senate to ratify it. So Obama took the course he did. David uses the phrase presidential unilateralism. I'll give Trump credit for a few things, a very few things. Somehow, him as a champion of taking offense at presidential unilateralism doesn't quite fit for me. And lastly, Dominic, just the whole production of the announcement yesterday. I mean, I'm surprised that it wasn't accompanied by pomp and circumstance when he walked out. The fact that he tweeted it hours before, it just shows the narcissistic quality of this guy. I mean, you know, he has the authority as president to do what he did, but the stage handling and production of it just says everything there is to say about the man.
Mary, this is a big international agreement. It's clearly with work you're doing with Feature Story News. There's going to be some international reaction, but it's also an agreement that was able to get agreement with over 190 countries. So to Eric's point, it's how much teeth it really could have. What's the reaction you've been seeing? What are your thoughts?
Obviously, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has the response that sort of, has dominated social media. And interestingly, that's the first time any sitting French president from the Élysée, their equivalent of the White House, has given an official address in English. That's how important it was for him to get this message out there, and it's certainly taken off, saying that he's clearly positioning himself as the anti-Trump on climate change and all of the other issues. As for, I think we got some great points here on the lack of subtlety on this issue. As with so many of the political points that we discuss, there's no room for any real debate in the middle. And I think the person who maybe responded with some subtlety was Representative Mike Kaufman, who, rather than jumping out and expressing opposition to President Trump, which he has done on certain issues, and as many people are doing now, even Republicans. He said, let's find a way to reduce carbon emissions. That's the one thing that, except for the hardcore deniers, everybody agrees on. I think it's his response shows to what degree he's a deft politician who's trying to get reelected in his very diverse demographic out there. So also, of course, Governor Hickenlooper had a strong response going sort of beyond the climate issue and saying that this is a lack of moral leadership on the part of our president, and that's sort of more in line with what we're seeing internationally. So Hickenlooper and the French president on one side, Kaufman in the middle.